I was physically kidnapped and held hostage as a child, so brutally that I went into seizures in my 30s in Iowa just remembering. It was walled up behind a neuroplasm. It was a medical mystery, a neuroplastic amnesia. Now, of course, the murderers have normalized this. They chose men named Pitmen because Pitmen is like Quarrymen, which was the original name of their band. And that's what I want to talk about because these um, killers still have jurisdiction in Pierce County, Tacoma. They send in their agency all the time. They have tons of money and they stage little drama, club routines. They're allies, they're British allies of Putin. Eno talked with Putin as Oliver Stone did through the whole production of Revolution Number Nine. Um, Reagan was a primary author of the script, which was about the murder of JFK, justifying it. I don't know that much about the Opium War. It happened during the Qing Dynasty. Um, British gunboats forced ports to open, forced the opium trade on the Chinese people. Revolution Number Nine was very similar. Martin Luther King didn't believe in drug trafficking. He was so aloof from it that he never addressed it, to my knowledge. There's no record of what he said when he appeared in Forbes Field in 1962, but if he hadn't mentioned it by 1968, I consider it highly unlikely that he said anything about it in 1962. So, one of the things that the British did was gun down the Kennedys and King and impose their drug trafficking on us. And Manchester Guardian, in spite, once said that Lenin gassed me. And Lenin once said, if I were to try to be a role model against drugs, people would just say, "Who are you?" The British can't make up their mind which lie to tell, so they tell both lies at once. That's pretty typical of power. They say the double is having a fantasy, he's imitating Lenin, and the double is having a fantasy that he's that the double is having a fantasy um, that Lenin could serve as a child's role model. He's imitating, but he won't take responsibility or something like this. I mean, it's hard to figure out. It's so um, rigged to celebrate a terrifying sadist who used, a child as his laboratory monkey. They brutally tortured me. But you could see why Lenin would want to step out at that point, because then they could say, well, you know, the score has been settled. You don't have to hold Lenin responsible for the drug craze that he used to destroy a society and a movement, a peace movement. Drugs were rigged into the genocide pornography. They took out a genocide warrant on me and said, "No, one less." We went on settle for one less than all of the people who were warranted against. And the people who believe in profit from mass murder flocked to Licky Chop's porno and so forth, and to hawk paintings that they used extortion to get from me. And they were ripping off our museums in Pittsburgh. I mean, who knows who all received stolen goods from Schulman. I'm sure Paul McCartney must be sitting on some. Donald Trump must be sitting some. Paul Manafort, Putin. There's no telling. I mean, looting museums is a big heist in these kinds of things. You know, the idea that Lavrov says very correctly that, something needs to be done to empower the United Nations so that they're just as indignant when stormtroopers from the United States trash Iraq as we have been about the Ukraine. But I don't think that's really Vladimir Putin's purpose. It would be nice if we had a domino effect of multipolarity, that everybody just said we have to take everybody else into consideration. We have to take everybody else into consideration. And there was a snowball or a domino effect of multipolarity where everybody started taking each other into consideration. But it doesn't play out that way. There's warlords. I mean, I'm aware. I stared into space to the Iraq War because there was no information. Afghanistan, I was just in shock, disbelief. I tried to help put together something humane about refugee um, recognition. But, the ISIS travesty was all result. It's just, the killing fields was largely a result of indiscriminate bombardment by America. I mean, it's terrifying. It's sad, and even our own people were hated by Trump. He said something like, "Oh, I didn't like shaking their hands anyway." I don't see how anybody can get past those kinds of remarks. But what Obama tried to depict me as somebody who was willingly self-intoxicated, and his crony from Harvard, Thaws, magna cum Thaws, was calling self-abasement. Peter Gabriel was calling confessional poetry. Was good druggy ethic is what he called it. And you're not one of the people unless you admit that you were having a doubles fantasy of being like John Lennon. This was crafted as a statement by Her Majesty's government in the Opium War that overthrew and punished the American peace movement with the killings of Kennedy and King. It would be nice if we had a society where the values of King and Kennedy were understood and read, and so that you didn't have to have necessarily their leadership, that an understanding was spread through enough people that you could pass around the torch of leadership and get the same results, but it didn't work that way. Johnson was a terrible choice of running mates. Ralph Abernathy, as gifted and wonderful as he was, had no chance of picking up the mantle for Martin Luther King. So, you know, they boogie woogied in with their opium war, the heresy and stuff. And then Penis Gabriel sets up this, and Penis Sinfield, how's that for a name? He comes and they set up shop. No sooner the king is dead, they're saying zapped him right between the eyes, zap, and having King Crimson of all things, and march for no reason, and torturing little Jimmy and stuff, saying it's an investment in his future education. Anyway, they brought in their opium war, in other words, and set up a genocide system. And they have to get away with it because they have nuclear Trump and all this crap. Public education. See, the United Nations should be strengthened because when the leaders I've been watching the last couple of days, one from Uganda was fabulous. I mean, she started with excellent priorities and said very carefully what needed to be said. And then she addressed, sadly, the security terrorism situation. But humanities came first with her. Biden was surprisingly macho. Macron was brilliant. But what you get when you watch these people, I don't know. I mean, the people from Uganda may be an exception, where they're round the clock humanists. But when you look at Macron and Biden, they're on their best behavior when they go to the UN. They put their best foot forward. I mean, even Lavrov put his best foot forward, wanting to be read as somebody who's stoically committed to the welfare of the international tragedy in politics and government. And so the United Nations is clearly the platform for the prism through which we should be working to enhance the reputation of the human adulthood. You know, children look up to us. Enhance our reputation for being wise stewards, capable people, understanding. If you want to say tough love, that's nice, but at least say love with meaning. So, what I would propose, I think, at this point, in terms of mega projects, would be make sure everybody had clean water. But aside from that, what I would propose is for the United Nations, if they haven't already, I need to do a check on that, to have a universal, as a declaration of eco schools. In other words, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the rock bottom minimum of eco school education that should exist in all cultures. And then have each country and each culture build around the eco school and human rights declarations to cooperate in such a way as to protect their society's stake in understanding the preservation of global welfare, so that we can understand um, taxes and distributions when it comes to addressing issues within a legal framework that have to do with development costs, loss and damage, and prioritizing. And I think that the educational mode has been switched off from the urgency that developed simultaneously with the COVID crisis and the appearance of the climate change movement. As we got past COVID, it was sort of a push to get back to business as usual. Now, I don't hear very many people saying that the Beatles should be allowed to get back to drug trafficking as usual, but they want to lie about what was done to me. And they hired an Israeli to normalize marijuana use, which was fairly normal, as a traumatic gesture. The Mariners made a joke of it smoking medicine. And you can imagine a child who was tortured and impacted with a brutal neurological injury, who had been gassed and brutally tortured by Lenin, as they admitted. They were saying it was tongue in cheek, but it was real. They're deluded. It was the monstrosity of the Japanese Axis revenge coming after an American, identifiably symbolic of the Roosevelt Kennedy group. and his father was a teacher's college with Eisenhower, and who was begging out because of brain damage. I don't want to embarrass people. You know, there was a story that Nelson Mandela was plotted against. They considered poisoning him in the brain so that he would be an embarrassment. I don't like embarrassing people. Yeah, I don't want to be an embarrassment to anybody. And I've been badly damaged. And they've used hypnotherapy to damage my public reputation and image too. So, you know, it's always like a little brat who wanted to play around with Hugh Hefner's crap. And I'm sure that they poisoned that storyline with, you know, the troubling fact that I have been nearly chemically castrated and been left alone for 30 years so that they can use their cyber stalking to, you know, play Svengali of the pornographic genocide presentation, the search for tasteful looking women in pictures and so forth, to get a little bit of exercise, libido, because I mean, I'm grown anemic and diabetic from the poison they gave me. You know, men like to feel robust and exercise. That's why they get married, for regularity. And they denied me all that because they British Trumpy turned Putinese targeted me as a child and have sold it as justified through the ranks because of their collective syndicate. The union and the oligarchs have worked to squeeze a certain amount of our population out. And I was the trophy of their game. So, you know, people used to mock me in Pittsburgh. Oh, he just wants people to be nice to him. Does that surprise anybody? You know, I found a place where people are usually pretty nice to me, and it's nice, you know, most of the time. But I keep to myself. I've had a curfew for decades, and I'm suffering from tremors, from nerve conduction problems, from carpal tunnel, apparently. So I'm resting tonight. But when it comes to international communications, international relations, the American society has an agenda that is a golden agenda to preserve the Constitution of the American Library Association. Now, there's been hot wiring attempts to use my um, conversations and poetry as a catalyst for mayhem, and I've done my level best to try to call attention to what W. and Blair did in that respect, try to stop it. I mean, Clinton, Obama, W. These unreasonable um, warmongers devastated the Middle East. It's, I was just staring into space. I couldn't believe what was happening. You know, it's so sad. And of course, the invasion of the Ukraine is crippling sad. I mean, when it comes to groups that I think are performing up to par, Doctors Without Borders very certainly is a good example. It's not just me who admires Doctors Without Borders. I believe they were given the Nobel Peace Prize. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. But they brought up the problem of double standards. Not one of them wants to see unwelcome extended to the refugees from the Ukraine. in places like Poland. But they said, there is some question of why, you um, when refugees arrive in Lithuania from Syria, they might not be encouraged to have the same welcome. Migration problems are something that can be duplicitous, and let's presume you really have it in for the Russians. I mean, I don't, but let's presume you do. Why would you hand an argument on a silver platter to them? The way that we talk about, look at the irrationality that we're getting from the Kremlin. The claim that we want a unipolar world. What better way to create a bipolar catastrophe than to go after people who are weak and helpless? I mean, they have to turn to somewhere else, some big brother come along and say, just work with us then. So the answer to the problem is to look at what the United Nations has done in terms of unified global response to Russia's hysteria and bullying and personality cult surrounding Putin and this invasion. And say we will never again settle for less from the international community, no matter who it is. Because the United Nations largely, although they were clearly against the invasion of Iraq, largely twiddled their thumbs. The American says, "Oh, we may have been wrong, but that's behind us now. We need to establish this as a golden mean, so to speak, a standard of behavior and conduct, professional response from the international community. When the West pulls a Putin, say, no, that's wrong. We're not going to support you. And everyone rise up as one to say, stop it." Now, I think I've given you enough to think about, but I'm dealing with the criminally insane. I went to the British full of love and faith for them. And they were like, that's our due. If you don't have love and faith for us, we're going to crush you. You like us, well, we don't like you. And that I learned from. And they're not going to let up. They are driven with hatred for me, driven. They attacked me blindside as a child. And I think it's probably because a lot of these rock stars were getting their penis pulled by state of the art Japanese servicewomen through the Krokag Ragusa's menagerie. So I think that's how it operated. And then they said, well, we'll just get rid of a bunch of slimy little American weirdos, which is obviously how they promoted me with this dude Kirshner from Israel. Never mind that I might have some gifts or talents. That's not important. Liberal gifts and talents is we can do without. you know. And the whole time they were secretly taping me because when a person is under duress, they can be compromised. And who should be helping? But the very people who would have cried foul for Nelson Mandela. I don't believe for a minute that I have incited any kind of anti-black ideas in pinpointing the facts that if I had been a black child who washed up with these kinds of nightmares wrapped around my throat, like a stalking killer, leaving their fingerprints. Jesse Jackson would have said, "Hold up, back in the '80s." But no, no, no. They had Jimmy Queerball, and they wanted to enlist everybody, so they made tapes of me making sarcastic remarks and so on, and allowed the Crow Hagrid Gooster to work with Oliver Stone in making a little bit of extra off of the Shulman Enterprises with the Licky Chops people. And what would it look like to me was somebody was stalking me and I had to try to find out what they were doing. Because they were pushing me into a gas chamber from the time I was about 11 years old. They used me for 2 Holocaust simulation experiments. 2 of them. They gassed me in a place called King's, like Heavenly Estate, King's Estate. They gassed me, sent me letters from Israel. And then they used me for an AIDS testing word game on Mount Desert Island, from which they still don't want me to escape. They poisoned me, they said, as an act of mercy. Because these gibbers are UW dialectical. What if we do this? What if we do that? And as I said this morning, you can't just choose somebody on the basis of race for anything, much less for extermination processes. And this is operating not just here in Seattle, but out here in Pittsburgh and up here in Maine. And it's coming from down here in Florida. That's a nationwide syndicate of domestic terrorism. They're saying when my jaw trembles, it's proof of rape, but he has to be castrated because his jaw trembles. That's the bird. In the handwriting analysis, there's a bird. Look at the bird. That means that means a lie has been told. And they say, run a yada yada. I mean, how can this regal idiot from Senegal have known to run a brainwave sonar through the Yammer through the brainwave sonar if they didn't know that there was a neurological implant to begin with? It doesn't make any sense. And you can't walk into the police station, you can't walk into the courthouse, you can't walk into the FBI, you can't walk into the peer counseling at school and tell anybody. Because Penis Gabriel got there first and said that Richard's doing it. Richard's in control. Richard's in charge. It's Richard's PlayStation. And the Beatles are very popular in Russia for doing this to one of us. The Beatles and Trump are very popular in Russia. And this is one of the reasons. Because they promoted a script humiliating the United States by killing Kennedy and King. They promoted it by murdering Cersei. And America says, that's Richard. Well, you know Richard.